Joined on the Western Pizza guest hotline by Farhan Lalji from TSN. And Farhan, probably the most interesting story and one of the most CFL-y things I've heard in the past couple of weeks. Zach Collaros suspended one game, failing a drug test because they called him a couple hours notice. He wasn't around and guilty as charged. When you first heard this, I did a double take reading the press release. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, and I think originally they were looking at a potentially longer suspension, and this was kind of a compromise, as you would say. And, look, I think Zach has had frustration with the league at various times and how they handle quarterback hits and decisions around that. I'm not suggesting that this was intentional on Zach's part to make a statement about any of that. I'm not saying that at all. But, it's the first thing that goes into my mind that, oh, man, this is just going to add to the list, right? But look, it's unfortunate. I'm not going to use this as an admission of guilt, right? I just don't see Zach in that light, especially at that position. It's just generally not what you do. And I also think that Zach's got, he's got to be looking at what's next for him, right? In the next year or two to move on with whatever the next part of his life is going to be. So I just don't think that Zach's motivated to play the game at a high level. I just don't think he's needed. I don't think he's motivated to do anything extra on the side to get there. I just don't think that's who he is. So it's unfortunate it went this way, but here we are.
It's kind of crazy, and the CFL has already changed a few things, saying, listen, we can't necessarily just give somebody 2 hours notice in the off season, and then all of a sudden they're guilty as charged. On the flip side of that, the Edmonton Elks in their number one draft pick suspended last week for the season, and apparently the Elks knew about this pending drug test before they drafted him. Said, listen, we talked to the player, we like the person, we're willing to stand behind it. And then I was reading that he tested positive for 9 different substances. Farhan, is that a wrong road to go down for a rebuilding football club, and you're Ed Hervey trying to make all these changes, and your number one overall draft pick is a guy that could not play football for you this season?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question, Maz, but here's where we are with the CFL. They don't get the level of news coverage and criticism as other leagues do. I mean, there was a time when the CFL did. It just doesn't now. And maybe it does in a place like Saskatchewan and to a lesser extent Winnipeg, but kind of nowhere else, right? Like the news standards and thresholds have changed. There's just not enough people covering it. There's not enough noise. You know what? I hear all the conversation before about, if we bring in a Canadian quarterback, there's going to be too much pressure to play him. And my comment has always been, what pressure? Like, what are you talking about, right? Because you got, a stringer from Saskatchewan at your practice, and now that's going to be pressure, really? And I think that kind of extends here. I think the level of criticism and noise around something like this is very, very low. I think that's why he slipped to the second round, right? I think a lot of people expected him to be a first-round pick, one of the more ready D linemen available in this draft. So I just think by the time he gets on the field in a year, everyone's going to have stopped talking about it. And right now, Ed Hervey's got to find ways to win. And if this helps him do that, even though it's a year from now, I think, he obviously got signed off on it all the way up the food chain. Ed Hervey would not make a decision like this on his own. So whether you're Chris Morris or whether you're the owner, I think everybody was in a comfortable place.
CFL rookie camps wrapped up today. Training camps will start on Sunday. I'm most curious because I'm rooting for the guy, having met him before on a personal level. Mark Killam, head coach, Edmonton Elks, brand new staff, the resurgent, the newly signed Trey Ford. Everything outside of that draft pick situation is on the up and up for the Elks. Farhan, can you see them not eclipsing what they did last year with all of the talent they've assembled and this coaching staff?
Well, look, the bar is so low. So number one, I'm like you. I've got a lot of time for Mark Killam, and I wish him nothing but success. And I have no doubt he's going to be successful, right? And I think there's alignment with him and Ed, and all the way through a young coaching staff. And J.C. Sherritt's another guy that excites me. I mean, on the offensive side, I've seen firsthand what Jordan McSimic has done, but J.C. Sherritt, is a guy that turned down Division I football and the potential money there because, he didn't have his own room, meaning your own position coach title, and that level of leadership. He wants leadership. He wants to ascend in terms of his responsibilities. So I think he's going to do a great job there as well. So, just a lot of people that people around the league are pulling for. And, I think the one thing with Mark is he's going to be authentic. And authentic for Mark is passionate and intense. That's just who he is. He's wired that way. So, you're going to see a lot of video of him over the course of the next few weeks, right, during training camp, that the Elks social media team is going to put out. And it's going to be this fiery guy. And people are going to think he's playing to the cameras. No, like, that's Mark Killam. And I think his players are going to love him for it.
About 3 hours south in Calgary, Dave Dickinson is running Stampeders 2.0, the reboot. He said 5 wins last year was not good enough. That's why they took the dynamite to the coaching staff and the roster. A lot of expectations, but Dave said in an interview, the pressure is internal. It's on us to be better. Forget what everybody else thinks. Is Dave just trying to deflect a little bit there? Because that wasn't Stampeder football for the past 2 years.
No, I think Dave believes that, right? Like, I think he has put a lot of pressure on himself, right? And the way this whole thing played out is that they made a ton of changes everywhere in the building, except for him, right? I mean, he retained both titles, and theoretically, he's not going to be the offensive coordinator this year, or the play caller. That's going to be Pat Delmonico, and Pat's had the title for a while, but he hasn't been the primary play caller, and now that's expected to happen. But if things aren't going well, I fully expect Dave to get involved because his name and his reputation and potentially his job's on the line. So I think the single biggest thing he wants to do is change the culture, because Calgary has been that group previously where they've done such a good job of bringing in players that they didn't need to go out in free agency, and those players were afforded the time to develop. And that hasn't happened in the last couple of years. Through injury and just lack of performance, they have put young players in the lineup a lot sooner than they're comfortable with. And as a result, those players feel like they've got a level of control and entitlement. And I'm not blaming all the young players, right? I think it's across the board, but the standard in Calgary has not been what Dave Dickinson and that organization is used to. So I think that's the single biggest thing they've got to do, is they've got to reestablish the culture and reestablish their standards. And Vernon Adams is going to be a really good piece to making that happen, because Vernon works hard. Vernon is selfless. Vernon is a guy that will lead and people will follow. And I think the combination of he and Dickinson is going to get that thing righted.
If you were running for office in Saskatchewan, whether that be mayor, premier, president, if we had one, yesterday's social media.
Don't say that. I keep hearing about, trying to succeed from Canada. So we don't want a president.
No.
We want to keep Sask.
Okay. So yesterday, when I saw you put out that tweet saying Farhan Lalji picks the Saskatchewan Roughriders to be in this year's Grey Cup, I'm like, my man, all right, night. But those same Saskatchewan Roughriders end up losing that Grey Cup to the Montreal Alouettes. Farhan Lalji, explained yourself. Rider Nation, we were on the high of the roller coaster, and now to the valley. What's going on?
Well, look, I would think getting to a Grey Cup would feel pretty good in Saskatchewan right now, number one. But, truthfully, I think the thing that both of these franchises have going for them above the other 7 teams in the league is stability, right? Like, if you look at Saskatchewan, the core of that team from a year ago, the pieces that made it most successful are still there across the board. And when they've lost a guy, they've managed to upgrade, right? Like, they upgraded a defensive tackle with Mike Rose. They upgraded at center with Sean McEwen. They got better in the secondary with Tavon Campbell. Like, they've been able to get pieces in key areas to make them better, but the core of their team is the same. And, I think the offensive line, if they can stay healthy, I think that's a big piece for them. So I'm a big believer in both quarterbacks. Trevor Harris in Saskatchewan and Davis Alexander in Montreal. I think Davis Alexander is going to be a star in this league. And I fully expect that if Trevor was an all-star last year, having missed 6 games with the fracture in his leg. So, I'm wondering what the next level for Saskatchewan's receiving core is going to look like, right? Because I love their Canadians, right? I'm big on Emilus. I'm big on Kean Schaefer-Baker. But I'm curious to see what some of the American guys, whether it's Sean Bain, whether it's Keyshawn Johnson, Dante Myers, right? Another guys that did some good things last year, but is there a step for them to take? And I know that, Johnson's 24, but the other two are like 28, 29, so they're getting older too. So, are they explosive enough on offense, and what's AJ Ouellette going to look like? Because, we know he's a lot smaller and thinner because he's changed his body. He wants to stay healthy, but this is a team that struggled to run the ball last year, so they do need some balance. I look at Montreal and I just see a lot of consistency there. All their key players are back as well. And like I said, I think they made the right decision by picking Davis Alexander over Cody Fajardo to be the future and face of the franchise. And I just think they're closer to it. You know, they won the East last year in the regular season. I think it's a really good group, and both teams are, you know, I don't think Montreal's going to win a lot to a little, right? I think there's very little to choose from, and, you know, a lot's going to happen. Ask me at Labor Day, I might have a different prediction.
Nice. I'm not afraid to change my picks either. So, hey, whatever the way the wind's blowing to keep Rider Nation happy. All right, let's switch gears. NHL playoffs. I didn't think that the Edmonton Oilers would come down to Vegas and win 2 games, going back home with a chance at a sweep by Monday. But yet, here we are. Vegas has looked at times brilliant and at other times uninterested and just downright awful. And the Oilers just don't quit.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting in terms of what people believe the key to Edmonton has been, and certainly their best players are playing their best, but I think the addition of Evander Kane has been really big for them. And, you know, people talk about Calvin Pickard. Calvin Pickard's been okay. Like, he's, you know, I know he's won 6. They've all been come from behind wins. They're just kind of outscoring. I'm not saying he's been bad. He's just been okay. Offensively, they've been really good. And Kane has really allowed them to flesh out their second line, right? And it's made their top 6 entirely different as a result. It's not that Kane's putting up a ton of points. It's just that you put everybody in the better role for their success than maybe what it looked like without Evander Kane. And defensively, I think they're playing a lot better, right? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around how Edmonton got to the Stanley Cup Final Game 7 last year, because that defense outside of the top 2 just wasn't good enough. Like, it just wasn't. And this year I watched them on the back end, and I think they're all significantly better, led by Darnell Nurse, right? Who's taken so much criticism in his time in Edmonton. So, you know, they're on top of their game. Last night, I think Vegas was really unfortunate because I think that was an absolute penalty, total can opener before the winning goal in overtime. So, you know, the refs got it right with the 5-minute major earlier, which Vegas managed to kill off, but they got it wrong later. And that certainly had a huge outcome, because I think in the third period and in the 5-on-5 play in overtime, Vegas was the much better team. And I thought they were finally starting to figure things out. But then, you know, and the other thing with Vegas is, as good as they can be at times, like, their turnovers are, oh my goodness, horrendous. Like, you look at Pietrangelo behind his net with 2 seconds left in that 5-minute major, you know, that turnover where he just fluffs it out there to Hyman and he hits the crossbar. Like, how does that happen in the second round of the NHL playoffs for a guy that plays for Team Canada? So, you know, they have moments like that just make it easy for Edmonton. So, you know, the series is going to be decided in Game 3, right? Because you're not coming back if you're down 3. And if they can get a win, if Vegas can in Edmonton, then it changes the complexion of the whole thing. So it's going to get decided there without question.
Outside of the Mikko Rantanen show, which we've seen for the past 4 games, dominate the NHL playoffs. So obviously, McKinnon wasn't his crutch. He can do it on his own. Did Game 1 between the Jets and Stars, because there's not a lot of natural friction there, seem a little uninspired at times? It kind of did seem like December, January hockey, where it was just very across the board. But outside of the Rantanen show, nothing really there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think when you're Winnipeg and you come off the emotional high, and really both teams, right? I mean, when you look at what Dallas did in the final stages of that Game 7 against Colorado, to get those late goals and win, and then you look at what happened for Winnipeg having 1.6 seconds left and you win the game in overtime. Like, when you come off those kinds of emotional highs, it takes a second. And when you give once you get into Game 1, all of a sudden, the team that loses Game 1 is going to be that much more inspired. I know Winnipeg potentially is going to get some players back for Game 2. I think the intensity in this series is going to heat up really quick because you've got a lot at stake for both teams. Winnipeg winning the President's Trophy. Dallas, for the last couple of years, has been on the cusp. Yeah, I think there's a lot at stake for both these teams. And I think the intensity in this series is going to ramp up really, really quickly.
All right, we'll wrap on this. A lot of people are, because the Oilers are up 2-0 and the Leafs are up 2-0 on the Panthers. So there's a lot of people that are already punching tickets and planning parades.
Mavs, don't say it.
Leafs, Oilers, Stanley Cup Final. It's an automatic. But now both fan bases are a little emotional. Speaking of roller coasters, one of them's going to be up here and the other one's going to be way down there. And all I know is
Okay,
Twitter's going to be a little spicy whenever the cup gets handed out if those two do end up in the final together. When all
So
of a
how does Saskatchewan feel about it? Because I'm telling you, in BC, if you're not a Leaf fan, right? Like if you're not from Toronto, you hate them and you hate the Oilers. Like everybody in BC is going to hate the Oilers. Like you have to have lived in those two markets to have any level of fandom out here. We even have a Leaf bar out here. Toronto owners and Leaf fans specifically congregate there, but in most other places, both these teams are going to get booed off the map. I think if you, in my opinion, and you tell me how Saskatchewan feels because you don't have an NHL team, so there's not necessarily that natural rivalry, but people in BC are going to want to see Winnipeg win. Like if there's a Canadian team that has to win, Winnipeg's the least defensive fan base, whereas Toronto and Edmonton, people here are completely annoyed by. So how do you feel in Saskatchewan?
I would say in Saskatchewan, most people here would be Oiler fans for a couple of reasons. I'm 51. And so growing up as a kid, that's when we got to watch the Gretzky era Oilers win all of those cups. And keep in mind, there was 4 TV channels back then. So that's what we knew. And they were the heroes because they were beating the Islanders. Okay. So there was that love affair with that. And then it's just continued on. And there's Flames fan and there was Oilers fan, some Jets fan. But I would say there's a good chunk of Saskatchewan that would cheer for the Oilers for them to win the cup. And keep in mind, if you were to go to any liquor store probably this afternoon, and it's going to be scorching hot this weekend, we're talking like 30 degrees, people picking up 2-4s and bottles of rye, probably have some sort of Oiler gear on, probably going to be at home, barbecuing something, watching that game, cheering for the Oil.
Well, for me, that's not going to happen here. The two worst places on social media are Canuck Twitter and Oiler Twitter in any particular order. So you won't find a lot of people out here wanting to see Edmonton win. There's going to be that, Canada's team thing. I've never been one of those guys only because,
me neither.
The majority of the players on the winning team are Canadian anyway, right? I mean, heck, the Canucks only have 2 Canadians, but, Florida last year was littered with them. So, for me, both those teams take up so much oxygen. The thought of Toronto being in a Stanley Cup final and just the amount, we're all going to be told whether we like it or not, we're Leaf fans. And there's just going to be an assumption that they've become Canada's team, even if they haven't. And the amount of oxygen they're going to cover nationally is going to be hard to stomach. And Toronto's got a chance because the East is weak, right? Toronto's got a chance to get through it, relative to the West. So, that's going to be tough to watch. I think I'm going to turn my television off, my friend. Focus on CFL. That's where I'll be.
There you have it. It's Farhan Lalji, NHL-less, but CFL pro. Farhan Lalji from TSN. He's brought to you by the Cooperators. Is it time to get financially fit? Cooperators can build a plan that works for you. Cooperators invest in your future together.